Hey everybody, this is Steve with Improbable Wargaming, and of course we're here with
Kyle McCord.
and we're going to talk about search and destroy with take and hold as a primary mission. Kind of talk about what our goals are and our objectives are for this mission. So what are you thinking here, Kyle?
Well, so this is mission A
Yep.
in the Leviathan Companion. So one of the things that you're often going to see with these missions, just sort of as a precursor, is that most tournaments will select a letter from there because these are things that GW said, okay, this combination of things works.
Gotcha.
So the way we're set up here, one of the first things we'll talk about is what does the board actually look like? Okay. So what you have here is, you know that one player is going to be here in this quadrant, right? One player is going to have all of their deployment here in this quadrant. Now, one of the things that's a little different than, say, Dawn of War or a lot of other deployments is you are a mere 9 inches from the center, and your opponent is 9 inches from the center. Rather than having 24 inches between you, you have 18. So if you're playing World Eaters, oh, it's a good day, right? If you're playing Orcs, it's a good day, right?
Yeah.
And unlike some other missions, you can count on the fact that your opponent is only going to have one objective in their deployment zone. That cuts both ways. You only have one objective in your deployment zone. That does mean that so what we can talk about in terms of the objectives is one idea that I often think about, which is called natural expansions. Okay, natural expansions have to do with which objectives you can easily acquire on turn one.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're looking at a map and you say, oh, Crucible of Battle, actually there's one that's definitely closer to me than anybody else. Okay, search and destroy is a little tricky in that regard. Your closest objective is right here. And that's not particularly close to your zone, right?
Yeah.
And actually, it's all of 16 inches from your opponent. So one of the things that we want to be really sensitive to is deployment.
Yes.
Yep. So Stephen, if you're deploying on this, pick an army that you play. How are you deploying?
Well, lately and more often than not, I'm playing Harlequins, and my primary goal, since we're a very fragile army, is to just really tucking in tight wherever I can. If there's terrain, let's say blocking some line of sight, then I will stage off of that as well. But typically, I'm in a tight ball, trying to limit what you can see of me because I really can't afford you to be hitting me first.
Yep.
And so I'm thinking that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, similarly, on the first mission at Flying Monkey, which we just came back from, right? I actually played against Orcs on this mission, right? Okay. And so the way that I deployed was my artillery, I play Astra Militarum generally, was all back here, okay? Was all back here.
Yep.
And then, so they're all here. I have my guardsmen right up here, but not anywhere close to this.
Yeah.
Because what I want to do is keep as much distance as possible between me and that point.
Yeah.
Then I have Gaunt's Ghosts up here.
Yep.
I have tanks here. I have tanks here. I've got split in between them, and then I've got a little bit of pressure going this way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because one of the things we want to keep in mind is, yes, it is fairly easy to run into problems on primary.
Yep.
It's also fairly easy to disrupt your opponent's primary, right? And so one of the things you'll see happen with this is, so with a shooting army, I'm going to deploy pretty far back, but enough that I can reach out here, because one of the mistakes you can make is you can say, you know what, I'm not going to push out very far. It will cost you 100%, right? So we want to have that natural expansion that we can push out to.
Yes.
But the other thing to say is be very conscious that if you're playing against a horde army, an army that can get at you very quickly, we have to be conscious that we want to get that alpha strike, right? And so we want to be back far enough. So it makes perfect sense if you've got a relatively fragile army, you know which pieces you can place up here that will survive.
Yep.
If you're playing an army that is fairly durable, what you're thinking about is a triangle.
Yep.
So your triangle generally looks like this. Bop, bop, bop.
Yep.
Or bop, bop, bop. Again, this is imagining we're playing from here,
Yep.
right? Because if you're playing a durable army, let's say you're playing Chaos Space Marines or you're playing Dark Angels, what you're doing is you're probably moving your Terminators up to here. You have vehicles that are moving up over here.
Yep.
And you're going to say, okay, I'm going to score a lot of points. And this is an important feature that we can talk about with this. In terms of scoring, take and hold is very generous.
It is, yes.
Yes. So what do we mean by very generous? Well, there are some missions where you and I both know, Stephen.
Yep.
You're getting 10 points a turn. It's not going to be more, right?
Yep.
You're thinking about like Scorched Earth or something like that. Here, you got the opportunity to be greedy, right? If you think, you know what, I can hold this, this, and this, they're going to give you 15 for it, right?
Yep.
That's not going to happen on a lot of other missions, right?
Well, exactly. And then the thing to keep in mind too with that is, like for example, with my army, even though we are pretty good at melee, we're really fast. Typically in this situation, my triangle isn't going to be the middle if I'm going first.
Right.
Like I never, as a Harlequin player or an Elf player, want to generally put anything in the middle. I want to start the trading, not initiate your trades.
Right.
So I typically set up where I'm kind of threatening to go 2 different ways, and then if I go first, then I won't even touch the middle. I will typically stretch out and just put a toe in here, and try to force them to go too many places. Because usually the armies that are the ones I deal with are Space Marines, right? Not a lot of resources. They can't really afford to spread out. They really just want to sit in the middle and hold one other point. And when I'm threatening multiple points, then that's kind of what I want to do there. But then like with your guard and stuff, you're pumping out tanks and you're threatening the center a little more than I am.
And sometimes you are going to have to, because it's a 15, armies that Stephen and I would typically play, right? Not necessarily, but I think here the example of orcs.
Yep.
On turn 1, orcs were here, and they were here.
Yep.
And they were there, and then they were threatening this one because they had squig hogs over here.
Oh, sure, yep.
And they had trucks that were right here, but the trucks hadn't unloaded yet.
Yep.
And then they had a squad that was behind a wall here.
Sure.
So all I had was Gaunt's Ghost that was hanging out up here.
Yep.
And I said, okay, well, what I need to do is I can't let them get a 15.
Yep.
So this is something you want to make a decision about. If you say, you know what, I think I'm going to score well enough on primary that my opponent can get a 15 and they're not going to run away with it.
Yep.
That's one thing.
Yep.
If you're playing guard and you're like, you know what, man, I don't know that I'm going to get a 15 on the last 2 rounds, then it's a little more debatable.
Yep.
So what I did was I said, you know what, here, you mentioned trade units. I think that's a good point to bring up. I said, I got 20 guardsmen. Charge! Right, and we rush into the middle and we stab the truck with our bayonets, but it's not about stabbing the truck. What it is about is having 20 OC on this point.
Yes.
And then a distraction Carnifex that you want to kill that I can bring back.
Yes.
And so turn 1, they managed to take this objective, or turn 2, I should say, managed to take this objective. They're getting a 10, I'm getting a 5, but that is radically different than them getting a 15 and me getting a 5.
Oh, big difference, yeah.
And so then I get to punish them for moving out onto the objectives. With orcs, it's easy to spread out and say, okay, I'm going to take all 3 of these points. Then you put a lot of pressure on me, but you also open yourself up to a lot of reprisal, which is what happened.
Yeah.
Right? I was able to kill a lot of his units. So that's to say one of our calculations in any of these missions. So we talked about deployment.
Yep.
We talked about considering how you want to score it. Yep. And then thirdly, how you want to position yourself for secondaries, right? Yep. So, if you're thinking about what you can draw that you can score, there's actually a lot that you can draw that's good.
Yep.
We have enough objectives in the middle that if you draw something like extend battle lines or secure no man's land, it's not that hard to do, right? Alternatively, if you draw something like deploy teleport homers, well, you're really incentivized to move there anyway, right? So this is a case where you're likely to draw secondaries that you can do. You probably don't have to go wildly out of your way, which is a good reason, by the way, not to do fixed unless you really have built your army to do that.
Exactly. Yep.
And so there's not really a big incentive to do fixed because you're likely to draw cards that are good. Additionally, in terms of the actual scoring, you probably are going to be very focused on primary. This is a very primary-centric mission.
Yeah, you should, if you play it right, you should maximize your primary.
You definitely have the opportunity, right? Because if you go, okay, I'm going second, okay, I managed to hang on to 2 of them for turn 1, which is really your big goal.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to get 10, 10, 10, and then the last turn I'm going to get a 15, right? 45. Looks real good,
It looks good, yep.
If I go first, I get a lot of opportunity to come out and seize my natural objective. I get to push, I get to put pressure in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm going to get a 10, maybe I squeak out a 15 at one point by putting stuff on the middle.
Yeah.
You're going to get that 45.
Yeah, exactly.
So you may not get the full 50, but you have really good opportunity to do so.
I think in this particular mission, going second is really a huge benefit, because then you have that chance at the end to maybe score a 15. You know, where if you're going first, there's a lot more earnest on you to make really good choices, where the second player gets to really mess with you more.
They do. And so there's opportunities. This is a very well balanced mission. It's probably why it's mission A.
Yep.
Right. You don't have an extra effect from chilling rain. That's good. Right. And so you're right. It plays very much like the kind of ITC missions that we've been familiar with before. The thing to keep in mind is, again, just with this mission, the thing that's unusual is how close together everything is.
Yeah.
Right. It feels very much like you have these back corners. You don't want to live there generally, but you also can use that as a safety zone if you're playing a more fragile army, whereas if you're playing a more aggressive army, you can front load up here, you can push into the middle, you can do all the stuff you want to. Armies get to basically play the way they want to on this mission, and it's worth keeping in mind that they'll often earn points for doing so.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, like what we're discussing is, even though you can, like, I guess the way to put it, like what you brought up, which I think is a good point, is not overextend yourself.
Yep.
Take what you need, because you can literally potentially win this game holding 2 objectives and then fighting over the middle versus trying to hold all 4.
Right.
If you're trying to hold all of these, then even an elite army has a better chance against you, because they're not going to mess with you in certain points because they can't afford to. But what it does allow them to do is put the pressure where they must, and you're always going to be weaker there because you're so spread out, which benefits your elite armies. And then if you're fighting other horde armies, they could do the same thing. They could ignore the point on this side where they don't even care about, and then really hammer you on the rest. So it's really wise to think about holding 2 and fighting for the center in this instance, and then kind of go from there. Like for me, like I like to spread out a little more, but it's more of a feign. Like I'm looking like I'm doing a weird triangle, right? Or you could say I'm doing an L, but the reality is I'm purposely, especially if I'm going first, I'm just waiting for you to take the center, and then I crush into it. I don't even care about this point. I'm just giving you something to think about, and then all suddenly, because I'm so fast, I'm in the middle and I'm hammering you, and that's kind of what I feel like that's the plan is. There's different ways to achieve that, but you got to know how your army wants to play it,
and you want to be responsive to what your opponent does.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. So that's kind of how we're seeing how you should play this mission as a general idea. There's always going to be some kind of surprise, but you just have to learn from those and grow. But just remember, in this mission, holding 2 points and then trading for the middle is kind of your optimal play, and then just knowing how you need to do that, right? Is your army durable enough to go in there first and take whatever comes in, or are you like armies I like to play, where we're really not interested in going there until you're there?
Absolutely.
So keep all that stuff in mind. We got more tactical videos coming. So this is the first one, and I guess we'll see you in the next one when we talk about the next mission. Bye.